Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 2025 release Y2K. Well, technically it was a late 2024 release, like December, so I'm counting it as 2025, but it will not be making my top 10 for 2025. I will tell you that much. I wasn't huge on this film. This is an A24 film, and I just wanted so much more out of this because the standards, I was gonna say my standards, but really A24 standards for the horror films they put out has usually been pretty high. But I'll tell you the good, I'll tell you the bad in this no spoiler review, obviously, as usual. So anyway, this one was directed by Kyle Mooney. It's the individual's first feature film. Written by Mooney and Evan Winter, also their first feature script. So I kind of don't understand how they ended up with A24 if they don't really have that pedigree there to kind of prove it. I don't know. I just have a lot of questions about like the people at A24 seeing the script, reading the script, and then being like, thumbs up, we're all in, let's do this. I question it. I just don't understand because usually, like I said, they're very strict with what they're putting out. Apparently Jenna Ortega was initially supposed to star in this film, and then there were some shooting conflicts, so they ended up going with, I think her name is Rachel Zegler, who not nearly as good as Jenna Ortega, but I thought she did fine. For the most part, cast is fine. Like, they did a decent enough job with their roles. Some people way more fun and enjoyable than others, but part of that's also the writing, like how the characters are written. They're supposed to be more fun and enjoyable, and the people who played those roles did a really good job bringing that to life. Also, I want to point out that it's kind of funny that this was not planned. Just by pure happenstance, I'm wearing my Chopping Mall shirt today. Maybe that kind of like subconsciously influenced me into watching Y2K. But anyway, I rented this through Fandango at home for $10.59. That's with tax. Synopsis. So it's literally taking you back to the 90s and giving you the setup of what if it's a situation where it's about to become the year 2000 and Y2K, for anyone who doesn't remember that whole situation, there was this thing with Y2K saying that like the coding on computers was all messed up and computers weren't going to be able to understand the year 2000 when it switched to that year. It was going to like confuse dates basically, and there'd be like catastrophic stuff, but people worked to avoid any of those issues and everything went smoothly. But there were a lot of people kind of like doomsaying about what could potentially go wrong. So this kind of takes that concept and it's like, what if Y2K not only didn't work out well, but became a little more ridiculous and over the top? And this is a horror comedy, so that's kind of what they do. But it's basically about a bunch of kids in high school who go to a party and they're like, oh, it's Y2K, we're just going to have fun. And then things go down and it is bad and people end up dying because, like I said, horror comedy. So you got to have some deaths in there. You got to have some gore. And there's some decent gore. There's some decent kills to it. I wanted more. I wanted them to go a little bit harder on that. But yeah, I'll talk about that more. But that's the synopsis. There's really not a whole lot of story to it, to be honest. And you would assume that once you start watching the film, you're like, okay, this is very basic. Plus, horror comedy. There's usually not a lot of story to those. All the computer technology that they end up showing in the very beginning of the film, total blast to the past for me personally, especially when I saw AOL Instant Messenger being used, which, little personal aspect of that, a story for that one. That's how I met my wife, is through AOL Instant Messenger. It was literally a situation where I was talking on AOL with a friend of hers who was a friend of mine from high school when they were in college together. And she was like, oh, I need to go somewhere. And she told her, why don't you talk to this person? And then we started talking. And then years later, we started talking again. And then here we are. We're married. We've been together for almost 20 years at this point. Actually, when I put this video out, it will be over 20 years, but by some months. But anyway, side tangent. Done. The technology stuff. This plays very heavily on nostalgia stuff and just like stuff of the 90s, like late 90s. So if you're someone who grew up then, you'll probably get a little more enjoyment out of this film than someone who was born after the 90s and doesn't remember this whole time period, the music, the, styles, movie shops, like Blockbuster, stuff like that. Yeah, it plays very heavily on nostalgia, way too much so in my opinion. So much so that I feel like the nostalgia aspect of it gets a lot in the way of making this a better film. It should have been focused a lot more on the comedy and the horror aspects, but it seems like it just veers so hard into nostalgia that they forget to give the proper time to the comedy and the horror aspects of it. Personally, that's what I think. The humor is solid though. A lot of the humor I actually did enjoy. It feels very akin to a film like Superbad, like that level of humor and those types of characters. It feels very similar to Superbad in those senses. But it gets a little bit from time to time. Overall, okay. There actually were a few times when I laughed out loud, so I will give them that. I think like 3 instances where they got me with some really good jokes. So I just wish there was more to this film. They pack so much nostalgia into this in the beginning, and it makes you wonder if they're going to be able to balance it out with some story. I wrote that not knowing where it was going to go. The answer to that is no. They don't really balance it out much with any decent story. The music used is very 90s. They, like I said, they place it very firmly in 1999, which is a good or bad thing music-wise, depending on who you are. I'm going to say a lot of the music, it's nostalgic for me because I was listening to that music at that time, but I also recognize it's not good music. So people who aren't nostalgic for that music will probably be like, oh, the music in this, oof, not great. So I admit that. About 30 minutes in is when the horror aspect actually kicks in, and it is fun. But don't think about the logistics too hard of what's going on. That's the thing. Like, you definitely have to suspend disbelief because it gets kind of ridiculous. Like, logic totally out the window. They go too over the top, and it feels out of place because they didn't set that up in the very beginning of the film, that like things like what happens could happen. So at that point you're like, oh, okay, we're kind of like stepping up to this level of ridiculous. Now I understand. So you have to like resettle into the movie after that. The most fun performances come from Eduardo Franco and Julian Dennison. Now, again, I'm going back to, it's not only that they did a great job performance-wise, but it's those characters were very fun and interesting, and they wrote them pretty well, in my opinion. So, enjoyed those. The movie starts to get slow, and the story starts to get stupid. And not in a fun, stupid way, in a boring, stupid way, in my opinion. That's where they just start getting even more ridiculous, and you're like, why are we focusing so much on this? Either go harder on the comedy at this point, if this is the story you're going to tell, or give us more gore. Give us more kills. Give us more gore. And you just don't get that. They also try to shoehorn in some emotional aspects into this film, which totally don't work. I mean, you see them laying the groundwork in the beginning of the film, but I was really hoping that they were just going to abandon that once the horror started, and it was just like a switch flipping, and they'd just be like, now it's horror time, now it's fun, gore, and mayhem. And it's not the case. They should have gone very hard on that. They go very light on that, and there goes my cat. Plot twist. There is stuff in the movie that is so corny that it made me feel embarrassed. You know those moments where you're like watching a video and there's this embarrassing situation going on with someone and it makes you feel embarrassed for the person? I was experiencing that with the film, and it wasn't having to do with what characters were going through. It was having to go with the corniness of the film and some poor decisions, and that made me feel embarrassed for the filmmakers. I feel bad saying that, but that's how I was legitimately feeling watching it. Some not great choices with this film. The ending is awful. That's the other thing. I thought this ending was so bad in so many ways. It truly is one of those movies where it started really strong. It had so much promise. It feels fun, and the horror kicks in, and it's a good time. And then it just like, it's this long, slow descent all the way to the bottom. So obviously I didn't love it. This film could have been a lot more enjoyable, though, if the best characters had gone the distance instead of some of the worst characters. They literally chose to take some of the most boring, uninteresting, stupid characters and have them last the entirety of the film, as opposed to taking the more enjoyable, fun, interesting characters and having them go the distance. And it was just like, you guys had a really good opportunity here to like end in a more fun place. It just doesn't happen. So, really scratching my head on this one. This 100% is the worst A24 horror film I have ever seen. Not to say that it's like totally irredeemable, because A24 standard is just so high. So out of 5 stars, half stars, and play, I'd give it a 2 out of 5 star rating. Didn't love it, but I would love to hear other people's opinions, especially if you liked it. Go ahead and put it in the comments. I love hearing differing opinions, because maybe I need to think about this differently. I have a feeling that people who are partaking of certain substances would probably like this film a lot more. Just gonna put that one out there. But yeah, go ahead and put some comments down there. We can talk spoilers if you want to. Also, thumbs up on the video if you want to help me with that YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to let me know that you were supportive in any way, if you like any video, including this one. If you want to pitch in monetarily, you can. I have a link in the description for memberships and what that small cost is per month for the perks that you get with the channel. And you can hit the notification bell button and you'll know when I'm putting up new videos. But regardless, thank you very much for taking your time to watch this. And until next time, keep it brutal.